The executions of the defendants of the Nuremberg Trials brought a chapter of the Second World War to a close for many. Heading towards the gallows were 10 men whose crimes had caused a huge amount of terror, suffering and misery for millions. These men were seen as the major warmongers of the deadliest conflict in human history, and amongst them were politicians and the remaining members of Hitler's inner circle. There were some names missing, men such as Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, and even Hermann Göring, the Reichsmarshal, cheated the hangman that day, but things inside of the makeshift execution chamber did not go well. The man who was in charge of the hangings was American executioner John C. Woods, a bungling hangman who botched his way through the 10 executions. This led to the condemned smashing their heads on the trap door, being left bloodied, and some did not succumb to their ordeals immediately, as was expected, instead taking over 20 minutes to finally be pronounced dead. But there were a number of people inside the room where the executions took place, and they documented the proceedings for the world's media and for governments, especially the Allied powers. But what was it like for those who witnessed the Nuremberg executions, and what did they see, what was so horrifying that day? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. The International Military Tribunal had begun in November 1945, just months after the end of the Second World War. 24 high-ranking Nazi leaders were indicted, though several would not live to see the end of their trial. Adolf Hitler, Heinrich Himmler and Joseph Goebbels had taken their own lives in the final days of the Third Reich. Others, such as Martin Bormann, were tried in absentia. The trials culminated in October 1946 with a series of sentences, including death by hanging, for a number of the defendants. The condemned men included some of Hitler's most loyal followers and key architects of Nazi terror. Hermann Göring, the commander of the Luftwaffe and second only to Hitler, Joachim von Ribbentrop, the former foreign minister, Wilhelm Keitel, head of the German armed forces, Ernst Kaltenbrunner, chief of the Reich Security Main Office, Alfred Rosenberg, the chief Nazi ideologue, Hans Frank, the butcher of Poland, Wilhelm Frick, a senior Nazi minister, Julius Streicher, the infamous publisher of the anti-Semitic newspaper Der Stürmer, Fritz Sauckel, responsible for forced labour programmes, Arthur Seyss-Inquart, the Reich Commissioner of the Netherlands, and Alfred Jodl, chief of the operations staff of the Wehrmacht. Each of these men were found guilty of crimes that shocked the conscience of the world, from orchestrating the Holocaust to initiating wars of aggression that resulted in tens of millions of deaths. The tribunal's death sentences were not just legal rulings but historical milestones, representing the first time leaders of a modern state were held accountable for such large-scale atrocities. The executions were scheduled for the early morning of the 16th of October 1946, inside of the gymnasium within Nuremberg prison. A makeshift gallows chamber was constructed with 3 scaffolds, around 10 feet high, made inside the rooms. This was done so the executions could be conducted quicker, with simultaneous condemned men going through the different structures. The man overseeing the proceedings was John C. Woods, the executioner, and in charge was Colonel Bertrand C. Andrus, the commandant of the prison. The entire execution process was tightly controlled, and only allowed into the chamber were a number of official witnesses, including journalists, doctors and guards. One man who witnessed the executions documented everything, Kingsbury Smith, who was writing on behalf of the American press. He described the scene inside the chamber, stating, 3 black painted wooden scaffolds stood inside the gymnasium, a room approximately 33 feet wide by 80 feet long, with plaster walls in which cracks showed. The gymnasium had been used 3 days before by the American security guards for a basketball game. 2 gallows were used alternatively. The third was a spare for use if needed. The men were hanged one at a time, but to get the executions over with quickly, the military police would bring in the man, while the prisoner who preceded him was still dangling at the end of the rope. The 10 once great men in Hitler's Reich, that was to have lasted 1,000 years, walked up 13 wooden steps to a platform 8 feet high, which was also 8 feet square. Ropes were suspended from a crossbeam supported on 2 posts. A new one was used for each man. When the trap was sprung, the victim dropped from sight in the interior of the scaffolding. The bottom of it was boarded up with wood on 3 sides, and shielded by a dark canvas curtain on the fourth, so that no one saw the death struggles of the men dangling with broken necks. Now the first man who went through the gallows that day, or morning, was Joachim von Ribbentrop, the former foreign minister. The executions followed a similar procedure. As mentioned, the men were led into the chamber, their identities were confirmed at the bottom of the gallows, and then they were helped up onto the wooden structure, up the steps, before being asked final words, and they were then handed over to the executioner. Of the first execution, it was said that von Ribbentrop was able to maintain his apparent stoicism to the last. He walked steadily towards the scaffold between his two guards, but did not answer at first when an officer standing at the foot of the gallows went through the formality of asking his name. When the query was repeated, he almost shouted, "Joachim von Ribbentrop," and then mounted the steps without any sign of hesitation. When he was turned around on the platform to face the witnesses, he seemed to clench his teeth and raise his head with the old arrogance. When asked whether he had any final messages, he said, "God protect Germany," in German, and then added, "May I say something else?" The interpreter nodded, and the former diplomatic wizard of Nazism spoke his last words in loud, firm tones. "My last wish is that Germany realise its entity, and that an understanding be reached between East and West. I wish peace to the world." As the black hood was placed in position on his head, von Ribbentrop looked straight ahead. Then the hangman adjusted the rope, pulled the lever, and von Ribbentrop slipped away to his fate. Now, one of the most infamous parts of the Nuremberg executions is that they did not go to plan at all. Many took some time to be pronounced dead, even over 20 minutes, as they struggled from the moment they went through the trapdoor. John C. Woods used the American standard drop method rather than the more skilled and reliable British long drop, which was used by men such as Pierpont. There were claims that he may have even deliberately misaligned the nooses or the knots to prolong the suffering, but the truth was that Woods was not capable of delivering death quickly on the gallows as was expected. He had previously botched things inside other prisons, but for his most high-profile job, he would not display any improvement on his limited skills. He also was not helped out by the gallows itself. The trapdoor was far too small, meaning that when someone passed through the structure, they hit the sides, slowing down the velocity of their drop, meaning the neck was less likely to snap, leading to a much longer strangling death. Also, the trapdoor did not latch when opened, and actually swung back and smashed the defendants on the head, with men such as Wilhelm Keitel being left bloodied, with blood pouring from large cuts on their heads, and this was all going onto the floor of the execution chamber. After an execution took place, it was said that, and I quote, "Officers and GIs walked around nervously or spoke a few words to one another in hushed voices when Allied correspondents scribbled furiously their notes on this historic though ghastly event. In a few minutes, an American army doctor accompanied by a Russian army doctor, and both carrying stethoscopes, walked into the first scaffold, lifted the curtain and disappeared within. They emerged at 1:30 a.m. and spoke to an American colonel. The colonel swung around and, facing official witnesses, snapped to attention to say, 'The man is dead.' Two GIs quickly appeared with a stretcher, which was carried up and lifted into the interior of the scaffold. The hangman mounted the gallows steps, took a large commando-type knife out of a sheath, strapped to his side, and cut the rope. Von Ribbentrop's limp body, with the black hood still over his head, was removed to the far end of the room and placed behind a black canvas curtain. This had all taken less than 10 minutes. So to those who witnessed the proceedings of the Nuremberg executions, things were much more brutal and less efficient than was hoped. They saw the former Nazis one by one go through the gallows, and each of them different in their defiance and resignation to the Nazi cause. Some of the men were more virulent than others. Take Julius Streicher, for example, the terrible editor of the Nazi newspaper Der Stürmer. He went to his death kicking and fighting, screaming Heil Hitler in the chamber. This unnerved the witnesses, and he even told the executioner that the Bolsheviks will hang you one day. But what happened with his execution really summed up the botching nature of the proceedings. It was said that, at that instant, the trap opened with a loud bang. He went down kicking. When the rope snapped taut, with the body swinging wildly, groans could be heard from within the concealed interior of the scaffold. Finally, the hangman, who had descended from the gallows platform, lifted the black canvas curtain and went inside. Something happened that put a stop to the groans and brought the rope to a standstill. After it was over, I was not in the mood to ask what he did, but I assumed that he grabbed the swinging body and pulled down on it. We were all of the opinion that Stryker had strangled. So John C. Woods, the executioner, had disappeared behind the curtain and then pulled down on Stryker's body, choking the life out of him, and he was the one whose intervention brought Stryker's life to an end, and it would have been chaos. Contrast that with the execution of Hans Frank, and it was said of his execution that Hans Frank was next in the parade of death. He was the only one of the condemned to enter the chamber with a smile on his countenance. Although nervous and swallowing frequently, this man, who was converted to Roman Catholicism after his arrest, gave the appearance of being relieved at the prospect of atoning for his evil deeds. He answered his name quietly, and when asked for any last statement, he replied in a low voice that was almost a whisper, "I am thankful for the kind treatment during my captivity, and I ask God to accept me with mercy." Frank closed his eyes and swallowed as a black hood went over his head. So there was some calm, but it mostly depended on the condemned and their attitudes towards the proceedings. One by one the Nuremberg defendants were executed, and the final Nazi plunged through the trapdoors at 2:45 a.m, around an hour and a half after the first. Now the witnesses had known that one man's execution would not take place that day, Hermann Göring's. He had cheated the hangman by taking his own life in his prison cell just hours before, but still the decision was made by Colonel Andrus to display Göring's body to show the media that the former Reich Marshal and the most senior condemned man was in fact dead. It was said of this that, with the bodies of Jodl and Seisenquart still hanging, awaiting formal pronouncement of death, the gymnasium doors opened again and guards entered, carrying Göring's body on a stretcher. The guards carrying the stretcher set it down between the first and second gallows. Göring's big bare feet stuck out from the bottom end of a khaki-coloured United States Army blanket. One blue silk-clad arm was hanging over the side. The colonel in charge of the proceedings ordered the blanket removed so that witnesses and Allied correspondents could see for themselves that Göring was definitely dead. The army did not want any legend to develop that Göring had managed to escape. As the blanket came off, it revealed Göring clad in black silk pyjamas with a blue jacket shirt over them, and this was soaking wet, apparently the results of efforts by prison doctors to revive him. For those who witnessed the executions, the event was both a grim necessity and a moment of profound historical importance. It was not merely a matter of retribution, but a declaration of justice on behalf of the countless victims of the Holocaust, the war, and Nazi oppression. The sight of the men who once wielded immense power, now facing the gallows, served as a reminder of the consequences of tyranny and inhumanity. The Nuremberg executions remain one of the most closely examined events of the post-war era. They have been scrutinised for their legal, moral, and historical implications. Some critics argue that the trials and executions were examples of victor's justice, while others see them as an important first step towards building a system of international law that could prevent future atrocities. The hangings of October 16, 1946 have since become symbolic of the world's determination to confront evil with accountability. They remind us that even the most powerful individuals cannot escape the consequences of their actions when those actions violate the fundamental principles of humanity. To witness the Nuremberg executions was to see history in its starkest form, the reckoning of a fallen empire, the punishment of its architects, and the assertion of a new moral order that would shape the post-war world. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.